Aquaman was always a character that was somewhat viewed in a different tier when in comparison to the other heroes or heroines within the DC Comics universe, as a result of writer interpretations of what Aquaman can do or can't do, even should do or shouldn't do. Casual and serious opinions of the hero and overall sentiment with the character have varied throughout the eras of his existence. But the speculative scenario is this: that time in the 1990s when Aquaman had a harpoon hound. Arthur Curry, or alternately called Orin, was always viewed as a paradox of a character. If written well or understood well by the said reader, can be enriched by the deep lore of Aquaman on related stories of who the character is and what he does. If written poorly or misunderstood by the said reader, can have misconceptions by the lack of depth with the character on related stories, could not or would not make much sense for Aquaman and what he could or should represent. As a result, the character has had fluctuations of periods in time where he was viewed as a great hero within and of DC Comics, on periods of time where he was ignored and considered to be a subpar hero from and within DC Comics. Due to the circumstances for Aquaman in the 1980s on the now iconic and equally infamous Crisis on Infinite Earths, the situation for Aquaman was even more tumultuous than other heroes or heroines within DC Comics at the time. Aquaman's own comic was cancelled, and the character made sporadic appearances in other related comics for DC at the time. Even after the crisis, the situation with Aquaman fluctuated between writers on creative teams, with no real focus or plan with the character, as details for him would be devised or implemented and made official in DC lore of the time, but it was later overwritten and ignored by successive writers or editors. Aquaman Time and Tide was a series from the early 1990s set to drastically remake Aquaman for modern times, and to reinterpret who the character is, what the character can do, and what readers could expect from reading an Aquaman comic. The series had Aquaman question facts about himself, how others viewed him, as well as his mental state being weakened through events as he later fights an enemy, with details having his hand eaten down to the bone. As a result of it being unsalvageable, he decides to have the bone removed and just replacing it with a harpoon tip upon the stump of his former forearm, further later opting for a more rugged appearance in comparison to his classic, properly kept appearance. His costume is partially destroyed, but instead of replacing it, he opts for a different form of chest protection. Eventually, the harpoon is destroyed, and a cybernetic prosthetic harpoon is fitted to his arm from Star Labs, with an extendable and retractable reel that he could control mentally. In the early 2000s, the harpoon was again changed for a water hound, and with the character more interpreted with a mystical or mythical aspect for him. Finally, Aquaman, through events, later died, and was eventually brought back to life in the 2010s with his hand fully as it was before the loss. During the 1990s, sentiment about Aquaman's drastic changes in character had mixed opinions from critics and readers. Some believed that such changes were drastically needed with Aquaman due to the fact that even during the revamp of the decade, readers assumed that it was all a stunt to bring attention back to Aquaman comics. Others believed that it was a fresh and new interpretation for the character, which was desperately needed due to Aquaman's status when in comparison to other heroes or heroines in the DC universe as mentioned. Despite the Harpoon Hound being simply within the comics, the Justice League and later Justice League Unlimited series of the early 2000s brought a variant of the 1990s version of Aquaman into the cartoon, and opinions of the adaptation were mostly positive. In the years and decades since then, the Harpoon Hound is even interpreted as a somewhat nostalgic interpretation for Aquaman in the 1990s.